Hello guys, it's Mr. Webker again. As you can tell, I'm actually in our classroom today doing this, which is pretty fun. I told you guys I should have this up by lunch, and that should be the case. Um, but before we get going, I want to let you know two things. Number one, we need to highlight answers in our notes. That's a part of your grade. I'm going to be checking you for it. So as you go through this, make sure to highlight answers to your study guide or your PowerPoint check in your notes. That way I know that you're referring to your notes when you answer your PowerPoint check. Secondly, about halfway through this video, I'm going to say a uh, a word, and if you come up to me on Friday and say that word, the first person from each period to come up to me and say that word will get 20 extra credit points. So I'm going to say it at some point during this video. I'll say the word is, and I'll say the word. And it is up to you to come to me in class and say that word. It's a cool way to get extra credit points. I'm not going to talk about it in class, so unless you watch this video, you're not going to know the word. So thank you so much, and let's get going on our World War II notes this week. So we are going over World War II for the next 5 weeks about. You will be taking your midterm after the fifth week. So this will be sort of the last section. This is what all our totalitarianism and Great Depression and all this stuff, this crazy stuff that we've been talking about, it culminates in this. Today is an overview. Over the next few weeks, we'll be going over just sort of what happened during World War II. So the next 4 weeks, we're going to break it down this way. We're going to talk about an overview of World War II, sort of what started it, um, what caused the European continent to fight each other, and then we're going to talk about in the second week what happened when the United States entered the war. The third week will be the Holocaust. Actually, the fourth week will be the Holocaust. That's an error on me. And then the third week will be important battles of World War II. After that, we will have a week to study for our midterm, and at the end of week 5, we will take our midterm. So the essential question today is, what were some major causes of World War II? That's basically what we're going over today, is the essential causes of World War II, and then the next few weeks we'll go into a little more detail. So to give you a little timeline of World War II and um, what transpired. In 1919, which is just after World War One, as we've talked about before, there was the Treaty of Versailles, which basically punishes Germany for World War One. Germany is not able to recover from this. They cannot make enough money. We talked about that before. And so, even though there was a peace agreement, most European nations hated each other still, which would come to cause a little more aggression and wanting to fight each other later on in the era. Furthermore, as we've talked about before, in 1923, Germany was basically bankrupt. And so what they did is they printed more money to try and pay off their debt. But like we talked about before, that causes inflation. And so basically, the money in Germany was worthless, and people began to be afraid of their government because they felt like the government was not going to be able to help them. Meanwhile, in Italy, as we learned about last week on Friday, Mussolini became the dictator or the supreme leader of Italy. He would lead a fascist government in Italy, which would be the first fascist government to be ran in this era. That will soon be followed by Germany and Japan, but Mussolini was the first person to do it. Just after Mussolini in 1933 through like about 1939, Hitler took over Germany. He basically spread this idea in a book called Mein Kampf, which said that the Jews are to blame for the evils that have happened in Europe. And so, if we could exterminate the Jews, then Germany could rise up and be a strong power again. And so, he basically uh, made the German economy stronger by forcing Jewish people and people who disagreed with him to work in labor camps for free. So they dug up coal, they worked in mines, they did really gross jobs to help the German economy, but they did it for free, usually until they died or they were killed. Also, Hitler wanted to take over Europe, but he understood that he could not beat Russia. So he signed something called the Non-Aggression Pact, which we also talked about last week. This week and last week are sort of similar. So he signed the Non-Aggression Pact with Russia, which basically he told Stalin and the Soviet Union that, hey, if I don't attack you, don't attack me, we'll be friends. I'm going to give you a hint though. Never trust Hitler. Hitler always never does what he says, and Stalin will soon realize that he can't trust Hitler. That Hitler will always fail him and will never actually do what he says. So basically, what started World War II was the idea of imperialism, which we've talked about before. Imperialism is when other countries take over uh, different land in order to gain money or to gain natural resources from that land. And basically, this spread throughout the whole world and it would spread into Europe. So, this happened in Africa. Remember, we talked about how Africa was taken over by um, all of Europe. Well, it continued into World War II. Italy took over Ethiopia, and then Japan, who saw what was going on in Europe, said, "Well, we can do the same thing." So they created a dictator type government, um, and they began to take over parts of China, parts of Russia. All of Korea was taken over by Japan. They were vicious. Basically, they uh, they destroyed towns. They did this thing called the Rape of Nanking, where literally um, they did horrible, evil things to humans there, and have never apologized for it. Um, Meanwhile, in Europe, Germany took over Czechoslovakia and other countries, which would lead to expansion throughout the world. But nobody actually stopped this. Like nobody said, "Hey, Germany, stop taking over land." Instead, people like France and Britain said, "Hey, Germany, you better stop, or else." And Germany said, "Or else what?" And nobody stopped them. So Hitler continued to take over land, which would cause really the expansion of Nazism and the evil things that Hitler believed throughout all of Europe. So Europe basically fell to fascism and to dictatorships very quickly. Spain fell, um, Russia fell, the Soviet Union was basically borderline fascism, Italy fell, Spain fell, parts of France fell. All these countries began to be taken over by fascism, but that never happened in the United States. And so many people wondered why. And there's many reasons why. The Depression actually hit um, Europe harder than it hit America. People are starving there and willing to do anything. And if a guy says, "Hey, follow me and I'll make sure you have food," you're probably going to vote for him. In the United States, also, we created a government where nobody can just take over. Even if we elect a crazy president, not that we've like ever done that before, but even if we elect a crazy president, he can't just do whatever he wants. We have a system called checks and balances, in which we ensure that nobody is able to just take over our government. So even though all these European nations fell to dictatorships, this did not happen in the United States, mostly because of the way our government is run and how far we are from the action of World War One. We weren't destroyed by World War One. So sadly, nobody actually wanted to fight Hitler. Everybody was very afraid to fight Hitler because we were in a depression. We had just gone out of World War One, which was a bloody war, and nobody wanted to go back into war. So basically, what most democracies said was, "All right, Hitler, we don't agree with you. We think you're crazy. Fascism is insane. But if you stop taking over land, we won't go to war with you. If we can make you happy, maybe you'll stop fighting." It was basically the idea that America and Britain and France had with Hitler. It was called appeasement. When you appease somebody is when you give them what they want in order to make sure that they don't do anything that you would disagree with. So we appeased Hitler. We said, "Hey, you can have this little piece of land called Czechoslovakia or Rhineland or whatever. Just don't expand any further." So I want to show you this picture, which was on the last slide. But before I get there, the first person from each class to show up in my classroom on Friday and say the word peanut butter will get 20 points extra credit. So go ahead. Remember, the word is peanut butter. Say it. 20 points extra credit. I know the lights just went weird. It's because the lights turned off in class, and I don't want to turn them back on. But if we look at this picture, you can see up above, up here, there. I don't know how to do up here. There we go. Up here ish, that way, right there. If you look up there, you can see Hitler, just walking over the backs of what says spineless leaders of democracy below. Basically, what that means is that Hitler can do whatever he wants. He's just going to walk over people because people don't have the backbone to stand up to him during World War II. And that's really what caused World War II. Nobody wanted to stand up to Hitler, and that caused most of the issues that we have currently. Or not currently, during World War II. So World War II really started about September of 1939. So in September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland, which was an ally of the United States. So before that, they'd taken over land like Czechoslovakia and Rhineland, which we talked about before, were once part of Germany. But when they took over Poland, Poland was never a part of Germany, and they did not want to be a part of Germany. So when Germany invaded Poland, it was an attack on Poland, and England and France saw that as a attack on themselves, and so they did not stand for it, and they declared war on Germany. This would start World War II in Europe, but the United States did not get into it until later on into the 1940s. So this is a map of the invasion of Poland, and I want to show it to you real quick because if you see the red and the black, those are two different countries attacking the yellow, which is Poland in the middle, which is interesting because the Soviet Union, which is the red, and the Germans, which are the gray, will not always be on the same team. But at the time, it was easy for them to attack Poland because it was in between them. Later on, Russia will use Poland to attack Germany when Russia switches sides because Germany does not follow the non-aggression pact. But at the time, the two of them working together probably could have won the war. This was super dangerous for both all of Europe and soon the United States. So at the beginning of World War II, there are two sides that form very quickly as soon as the Soviet Union and Germany invade Poland. So the first side is the Axis powers, which currently has four countries on its side. That will change in the war, but currently it has four countries, which are Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union, now called Russia. And the Allied powers, at the time, although it says there are three, only really had two countries on their side. The United States supported by giving stuff to England, but we were not actually a part of the war until later on. So the Allied power was really Britain and France at the beginning, and later would become the United States as well, and some other countries that joined in with us. So to give you sort of a nutshell of what happens, a quick overview of what happened in World War II, Germany invades just about every country in Europe. They invade Denmark and Norway, which are countries in the northern part of Europe, and then finally they invade France. When they invade France, they use the land in France to bomb Britain from. So France and Britain are very close to each other. There's a little ocean in between them, but it's a very small channel, and so they can fly planes from France and bomb Britain with them. They never actually land in London or in England, but they do bomb them, and they basically begin to destroy Britain. In France, though, even though they've been taken over by the Germans, the people do not like the Germans. They are not a supporter of the Germans. So the Germans put in a dictator called Vichy, and he sort of runs the country. But the people do not actually like this leader, and so they fight against the Germans. Even though the Germans have invaded their country, they create a secret underground like army to attack the Germans, which I think is pretty cool. That there's like a secret army that people are, I don't know, I just think that's so. Going back to this map, now we see that the gray begins to invade the green country next to it, to the left of it. Germany invades France, which is the green country next to it, and begins to sort of take over that land, which only leaves England to be the only really stop to Germany before the United States enters the war. This is a picture of England being attacked by Germany. They would fly planes over England at night and just bomb the heck out of them because there was no way to spot planes at night unless you could see them in a light. So it was pretty easy to get planes over London and just bomb these cities. It basically destroyed parts of England. Here's a picture of a man walking through the bombed parts of England trying to deliver milk to people because people were starving because they could not get food into these large cities. Many people, to avoid the bombing, would actually hide in bunkers underground. There's a subway system below England, and people would live there during the bombing raids in order to make sure they did not get killed. So this is a picture of people living in the bunkers during World War II, and I love that some of them are smiling. I think that's crazy that like your town is getting destroyed and you can still be happy. I find that relatively humbling. And so, a few years into the war, this is where we leave off. We see that basically allies have been destroyed by Europe. We see that the Soviet Union is now an ally. We will talk about why later. Basically, Hitler tries to invade the Soviet Union, and that uh, gets the USSR pretty mad until they switch sides. But if you can see, basically Hitler is on his way to taking over the world. And so without the United States entering, he probably would have done so. And so the Allies at the early stages of the war are losing big time. So this is where we end today. This is a short video. You're welcome. Make sure you get this done before class on Friday. It's only 15, 16 minutes. You should be great. Have a good week, guys. If you need anything, remember, I'm always on remind. You can always email me. And I wish you the best as we study World War II.